This is Research Like a Pro, episode 342, Joseph Lee Robinson and the Book of Covenants. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogist professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the authors of Research Like a Pro, a genealogist guide. With Robin Worthland, they also co-authored the companion volume, Research Like a Pro with DNA. Join Diana and Nicole as they discuss how to stay organized, make progress in their research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go! This episode is sponsored by newspapers.com. Hi everyone, and welcome to Research Like a Pro.
Hi Nicole, how are you doing today?
Hi Mom, I'm doing well.
What have you been working on?
Well, I've been working on studying church records, and it was really fun when I worked on my kinship determination project back in December to study the church records of our Harris line. They were members of the Church of Christ, which was very popular in Texas and Oklahoma. And I actually ordered a book written by a man who was a member of the Church of Christ and a history professor. And he ended up writing a really good book about that. And I was so excited to read it. And then I sadly found out that he passed away just a couple months ago. So I tried emailing him, and that's how I found out. Well, fast forward to January, and I wanted to do some writing about ancestors, like you have encouraged everyone in your 52 ancestors post. And I thought, maybe I could do more with church records and really learning about those. And so I decided that because most of our ancestors were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which we're members of, that it would be really fun to work on those church records. And there are a lot of them online in manuscript form that have been digitized that I haven't looked at. So that was something that I made a goal to do. And we'll see if I can do it every week. That's the goal. But if I miss a week, it's just busy.
Even if you get a couple a month, that's more than you would have done without that goal.
Exactly.
So that'll be great.
So I started making a list of all the various ancestors that I have. And I already had a list of them for my ancestors. So I'm working on a list of my husband's ancestors and just taking note of different topics and themes and places they lived, and then I'll try to connect those topics and themes with what we're currently studying in our church's study program, Come Follow Me. So that'll be fun.
That'll be great. And it's wonderful that there are so many manuscript collections available now. It's amazing what we can see. So this is the perfect time to be doing this.
Right, I'm excited. Well, the announcements for today are that we have a Research Like a Pro webinar coming up on Tuesday, February 18th, and it'll be presented by Kathy Duncan. The title is Texas Migration Patterns and DNA, Connect Lucinda Wright Rinker to Her Father. And this will be a really interesting case study centered in Johnson County, Texas, and including information about the Texas State Lunatic Asylum in 1880, looking at records from 4 Texas counties, connect the A.F. Rinker and Silas Wright families through parallel migrations, and then DNA seals the deal. So this will be very applicable to anyone who has migrating Southern ancestors and who wants to use proximity and DNA to help solve the case. Well, as always, please join our newsletter. Every Monday you can get a link to our newest podcast episode, our newest blog post, our newest YouTube video, and information about upcoming conferences that we're speaking at. And 2 of those are Roots Tech, March 6th through 8th, and the National Genealogical Society Family History Conference on May 23rd through the 26th. So we hope to see you there. Now we get to talk about the first post in my series about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints church history. So I'm excited to dive in. And the first ancestor I selected was Joseph Lee Robinson. And he is my husband's 4th great-grandfather on his father's mother's side. And he was born on February 18th, 1811 in Shaftesbury, Bennington County, Vermont. And when I looked up his birth record on Family Search, it was an index card. And so I wanted to find the original. And so often in Family Search, they'll have indexed entries that are not linked to the microfilm with the original. And so you have to go find the original. And sometimes it will have a link to the microfilm that you need to look at. And so when I clicked on the link to that microfilm, I noticed that it was arranged chronologically and the town records were kind of mixed up a little bit. I mean, it was just a big volume, a very old looking volume because they imaged the cover of it. And on the cover, it said births on like a little paper they had attached to it. But when you open the first page, it says marriages. So I went several images past and finally found where it started going into the births. Then I fast forward until 1811 and found it was not recorded at the time the children were born. But several years later, in 1816, the family came in and recorded the births of the last four of their children. So that was really interesting to see Nathan and Mary Robinson come in and record Joseph Lee Robinson and his brother Ebenezer Robinson and two of his sisters, that they were all born in the last few years. So that was kind of fun to see how the town records worked in Shaftesbury. And I've heard that similar things about other New England town records as well. So he was born there. Then fast forward in 1883, when he's an older man living in Hooper, Utah, he decided to write an autobiography about his life, including some of the most important incidents of his life. And he started by writing about his birth, his parents, his grandparents. He even mentions his great grandfather, who he was named after, Joseph Lee. And then he talks about how when he was 5 years old, his father sold the farm in Shaftesbury and they moved from Vermont to the state of New York, like so many in New England were doing, into that new kind of frontier area in upstate New York.
Wow, that's so neat. And I love how in your blog post you can just click on the actual record and go straight to it. It's so fun. And I'm looking at his autobiography and journal, and this is super neat. Well, let's read a little bit about what he wrote. So after recording the birth of his son Ebenezer in 1835, in his autobiography he wrote, quote, "About these days my mind was wonderfully wrought upon, the Spirit constrained me. I prayed much and earnestly unto the Lord for the people, that God would pour out of his Spirit and cause a revival or a reformation among the people. And I received a testimony in the Spirit that the Lord would grant my request, and that I should see the day when the people should bow to the mild scepter of King Emmanuel." Close quote. Well, that is so neat. And Joseph was part of this religious fervor that was growing in the United States. And we have learned about this, that in the 1820s and the 1830s, there was a religious fervor that was spreading from Kentucky and Tennessee all the way up into New York and frontier areas of the Ohio River Valley and the Midwest. And this was such a big deal, the historians called it the Second Great Awakening. Well, during this time, there were circuit riding Methodist ministers who reached the frontier settlers and preached anywhere they could, in cabins, courthouses, fields, street corners, and areas of New York State became so excited over religion at this time it became known as the Burned Over District, which alluded to the intense spiritual passion spreading like a wildfire. One of these movements established there was the Church of Christ, founded on April 6, 1830 by Joseph Smith at Fayette, Seneca County, New York. And the church's present name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, wasn't adopted until 1838.
Right. And researching this, I found that the minute book I used in the 1830s before 1838, they were calling them the Church of the Latter-day Saints. So first they were the Church of Jesus Christ, then the Church of the Latter-day Saints, and then finally in 1838, they put it all together. Well, Joseph Lee Robinson was looking for a reformation, and he was part of this burned over district that were very excited about religion, and he found one. And it actually came to him through his brother Ebenezer. And he recorded in his autobiography, "At this time, I knew nothing of the work of God on the earth, that he had revealed the holy gospel to man until my brother Ebenezer came to me in the month of August, 1836. He brought to me the holy gospel. He was an elder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he opened up the holy scriptures to me as I had never seen them before. I saw the light of truth. I received it readily in a few days and believed every word he said. I received it with great joy, and he, my brother, baptized me and confirmed me a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in the name of Jesus Christ, he gave to me the Holy Ghost. I received from him the Book of Mormon and a copy of the Book of Covenants. I read them much, and thanks to my heavenly Father, that I lived in this day in the which God had spoken from the heavens and has committed the dispensation of the fullness of times.
Well, the Book of Covenants that Joseph Lee Robinson spoke of was what the church today calls the Doctrine and Covenants, and it's a publication of Joseph Smith's Revelations. The church attempted to publish them in 1833 as a book of commandments for the government of the Church of Christ, but they were thwarted by a mob attack on the printing press. But on 24 September 1834, a committee was appointed by a council of church leaders to compile the church's doctrines and revelations, and the minutes of the council meeting mention this Book of Covenants. And it says, the council then proceeded to appoint a committee to arrange the items of the doctrine of Jesus Christ for the government of the Church of Latter-day Saints. These items are to be taken from the Bible, Book of Mormon, and the revelations which have been given to the church up to this date or shall be until such arrangement is made. And then it continues to talk about how they made a proposal, they nominated it, and they seconded it, they voted, and they agreed by the whole conference that they would arrange and publish this Book of Covenants.
It's interesting to see that Joseph Lee Robinson referred to the book the same way the original council did, as the Book of Covenants. And this is probably what it was known as colloquially. And in this time period, one of the definitions of the word covenant, in addition to a mutual agreement of two or more persons, was a solemn agreement between church members that they will walk together according to the precepts of the gospel in brotherly affection. And I found that definition in Webster's dictionary from the 1840s. So it was one of 3 or 4 definitions for covenant, and this one was the third one, a noun, and it said specifically when used in the context of church affairs. And I thought that was interesting because the original title was A Book of Commandments for the Government of the Church of Christ. And then when they talked about wanting to make it again, they called it a Book of Covenants. And really, what it was a bunch of revelations that Joseph Smith recorded. And so they wanted to bind these and publish them so that all the members of the church could read them, and not just Joseph Smith and the other members of the High Council and the other leaders of the church. And they had already written them down into like a manuscript book of Revelations. And you can see those, the Revelation Book 1 and Revelation Book 2, the handwritten copies of these are available on the Church History Catalog website. And you can see a picture of one of the pages in the blog post associated with this podcast episode. And it's interesting to see the original text of these writings that are now canonized scripture of the church, to be able to see the originals. And they aren't the true originals that, Joseph Smith wrote down when he first received the revelation, but they are the ones that were copied into a book. And then they used these Revelation manuscript books to compile the Book of Covenants.
Well, this is fascinating. But let's have a word from our sponsor, and then we'll continue. The new year is the perfect time to start or restart your genealogy research with fresh eyes and new goals. Dig even deeper into your family history with newspapers.com, the largest online newspaper archive. If you're a genealogist, you know old newspapers help you find forgotten stories and fill in the gaps between vital records. That's where newspapers.com comes in. A subscription to newspapers.com gives you access to over 1 billion pages of historical newspapers from across the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and beyond. Whether you're tracking down your great-grandmother's obituary or uncovering a long-lost photo, you'll be amazed at the treasures waiting for you in more than 3 centuries of newspapers. And when you find something interesting, newspapers.com makes it easy to share it with family and friends. You can even save it directly to your ancestry tree. For listeners of this podcast, newspapers.com is offering a special discount of 20%. Just use the code FamilyLocket at checkout. Kickstart your year in genealogy with newspapers.com. Well, returning to our topic and talking about this committee, they completed their work and published the Doctrine and Covenants of the Church of the Latter-day Saints in 1835. The preface was dated 17 February 1835 and explained that the book contains the leading items of the religion. Although the committee originally thought to combine doctrine from the Bible and Book of Mormon with the Revelations, they decided to go a different direction, including instead 7 doctrinal lectures on faith, hence the first part of the Doctrine and Covenants, traditionally attributed to Joseph Smith but possibly written by Sidney Rigdon. The second part, or Covenants and Commandments of the Lord to His Servants of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, included 102 revelations, and although making up most of the book, the revelations were placed second, possibly due being ready to typeset later than the doctrinal lectures on faith.
Right. That's what historians think. They're not sure, but they were, in the Joseph Smith Papers website where they put up the minutes of the church and the Revelation book, they have this really great historical note about the books and manuscripts. And for the 1835 edition, you can go on to the Joseph Smith Papers website and you can see the original 1835 printing of that. And it talks about it in the historical note. They don't know why they decided to put the Revelation second, since that was the main purpose of making the book. But maybe it was just because they weren't quite ready to typeset and the doctrinal lectures on faith were ready. So they went ahead and typeset those first. A lot's kind of unknown about the choices, but they do know that they were trying to put together those revelations that Joseph Smith had written down so they could distribute them and send them out with all the missionaries that were going out. In August of 1835, the book was printed and several church leaders had received advance copies of them and had been reading them and getting ready to, accept or reject it. And they actually had a general assembly on August 17th. And in the minute book, it has several pages talking about what happened at this general assembly. And so the meeting minutes say, convened in Kirtland, August 17th, AD 1835, by the Church of the Latter-day Saints, for the purpose of examining a book of the commandments and covenants, which has been compiled and written by the following committee. And then it gave all of their names, which it was interesting to see who the committee was comprised of. It was actually the first presidency, so the president of the church, Joseph Smith, and his counselors, and the assistant to the president. And so that was the committee, and they were the ones working on that. And the committee, having finished the said book according to the instructions given them, it was deemed necessary to call the General Assembly of the church to see whether the book be approved or not by the authorities of the church, that it may, if approved, become a law unto the church and a rule of faith and practice unto the same. So you can kind of see that they are hoping that this will kind of be like a binding contract or kind of like a government of the church type of document that's showing the beliefs of the church and also the practices that they're going to adopt.
So interesting. Well, we also learned that after Levi Hancock led the singing of Glorious Things of Thee Are Spoken, Oliver Cowdery said the opening prayer, and then another song, Beyond These Earthly Scenes in Sight, was sung. Then several items of business were taken care of, including ordaining men to priesthood offices and giving priesthood blessings by laying on of hands. They then adjourned for 1 hour, and upon returning to the assembly, the following was recorded in the minutes. President Oliver Cowdery arose with the Book of Doctrine and Covenants, 284 pages, containing the faith articles and covenants of the Latter-day Saints, then proceeded to take the vote of the whole House, commencing with the presidents of Zion. President William Phelps arose and spoke in high commendation of the book aforenamed and said that he had examined it carefully. It was well arranged and calculated to govern the church in righteousness, if followed would bring the members to see eye to eye, and further that he had received the testimony from God that the revelations and commandments contained therein are true. Wherefore he knew assuredly for himself, having received witness from heaven and not from men. President John Whitmer testified also that he was well acquainted with the work and knew it to be true and from God. President John Smith arose and testified his joy that we have at length received the long-wished document to govern the church in righteousness and bring the elders to see eye to eye, and further that he was present when some of the revelations contained therein were given and was satisfied they come from God. So neat that we have a record that we can actually see this written description of what happened in this meeting per the minutes. And often I think with church records, we don't really think that minutes are that important. I know I have looked through lots of church records and minutes, and hoped to find my ancestors' surname or found them in the record, but it just adds so much context to our ancestors' lives when we learn about what was going on within their church and what they were believing, and it helps give us some insight. So this is just wonderful.
So true. And what was kind of fun, I wasn't expecting to see any names that I recognized in the minutes, really, because I got off on this whole exercise of researching about the Book of Covenants because it was mentioned in the autobiography of an ancestor who joined the church like a year after this. So I just wanted to understand, what was this Book of Covenants and why was it called that at that time? Well, looking at the minutes, I saw another ancestor's name right there in the minutes. Levi Hancock is my husband's mother's great grandfather, and he was leading the singing. And it was so fun to see his name and see the actual names of the songs they sang. I can't wait to go look up these songs. They weren't ones that I'm familiar with. I think they wrote down the first line. I don't know that they had titles, but it's just really a fun piece of insight into their time period and what they were singing.
Absolutely. So fun. Well, those minutes continue stating the names, as minutes often do, of presidents of various bodies with the church, including the High Council, the 12 apostles, 70 bishopric, elders, priests, teachers, and deacons, and their testimonies that the book was true. So we're going to have a lot of names mentioned, which would be fabulous for their descendants to go find them. And finally, all members present voted, and it states that Brother Thomas Gates then took the book and expressed his satisfaction with it, and also called a vote of all the members present, both male and female, and they gave a decided voice in favor of it, and also the committee, there being a very large portion of the church present. All of the above testimonies and votes were voluntarily and unhesitatingly given with the utmost freedom of conscience on part of the assembly. Well, I love that it mentions that the females got to vote as well. So that is fun to read and to realize that the women had a say in this.
Yeah, that was. I was really interested in kind of the format of approving the book because it was a little different than anything I've seen before, where a president of a group stood up, like a president of the High Council, said he liked the book, approved of it, and then his whole High Council then voted to confirm it. And then another guy came up who was of the 12 apostles and said his piece, and then they all voted on, all of the 12 apostles voted, and then all the 70 voted, and then all the bishopric members voted. And when it got down to the deacons, one deacon stood up and then it said, there's only one other deacon here, and he approves it. So that's done. And so each group had their own vote separately to confirm it.
Wow, that's amazing. That would have taken some time.
Right? Yeah, it was quite a process.
I feel like sometimes these meetings of old went on for hours and hours.
I think you're right. Well, going back to Joseph Lee Robinson, my husband's fourth great grandfather, his autobiography mentions that he read this Book of Covenants that had been published about a year before he was baptized. What's interesting is that right after he records that he read the Book of Covenants, he recorded that he was thankful to be born in a time that he could be part of God building his kingdom in the latter days. And that, quote, our God was able to gather his people Israel from the long dispersions and build up his kingdom in the earth and bring forth his Zion preparatory to the millennial reign of Christ on the earth, which is to last for 1,000 years according to the predictions of the holy prophets. And I thought that was such an interesting thing for him to say right next to talking about the Book of Covenants, because this is very similar language to that first section of the Doctrine and Covenants. And in section 1, it's generally known to be a preface to the Book of Commandments, which they originally tried to publish in 1833. And so that section was given to preface the whole work of all the revelations being published. And that section talks about the second coming of Christ and the fulfillment of prophecies from God's prophets. So I put an image of that revelation from Revelation Book 1 up on the blog post that goes with this episode. And so you can actually see the handwriting of that in the Revelation book in section 1 at the end. And then you can also see it in the printed version. I just think it's so beautiful to see the printing and the old pages. They're kind of yellowed. And another really cool thing about the Joseph Smith Papers website is that it had those source notes and the historical notes right next to the images. So if you had a question about it, you could read that. And I did. I noticed that in the title page of this 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, it had the name N.K. Whitney written on it. And I recognize that as being Newell K. Whitney, one of the early church leaders. And it talks about the provenance of this 1835 edition being passed down in the Whitney family and then donated to the Church History Museum in the 1980s. So that was really fun to see as well. There probably aren't that many of these remaining out there because they printed so many more later in the 1840s and so on, and they added more revelations and more sections to it as time went by. So it's neat to be able to see the first edition, the one that our ancestor Joseph Lee Robinson would have seen, the one that he read, and see the actual words that he read when he was inspired to be baptized. So that was pretty neat. And I'm really glad that the Joseph Smith Papers website has made this available on their website. And they have so many great resources. It was just exciting to see all the work that they've done in the last few years. And I know Richard Lyman Bushman, one of our favorite historians, was a big part of that project.
Oh, that's great. Yes, he is an amazing historian. Well, this is a wonderful website, and it's exciting to see how the historical documents are being made available, not only that we can read them, but we can learn about them, because I do love all the notes, all of the cross-referencing and the further context and information to the actual documents. So what a valuable resource, and how fun that this year you're going to be diving into this website and finding all the information for the ancestors as they were involved in this.
Right. That one of my goals is just to understand what resources the church has placed online for us to use in our research. And one of the frequently asked questions on the Joseph Smith Papers page is, who is this website for? What is it for? And it talks about how it's for historians and journalists, family historians who want to study their ancestors or the history of various parts of the church. And so it really is for us as genealogists and family history researchers to be able to gain that context for the things that we're learning about our own ancestors and help fit it into the larger church movement at the time, what was going on. And, why was this book called the Book of Covenants when today it's called Doctrine and Covenants? And where did that name originate? And doing this exercise was so valuable to understand that, and it made me want to read and look at the original 1835 version of the Doctrine and Covenants, which is such a cool thing that we can see online. So it was fun. And I look forward to writing more about these little vignettes of our ancestors.
Well, thank you for doing that. And I hope this has been an inspiration to anyone listening who has something similar in your own family history. I think church records are something that we don't often dive into. And perhaps there is something in your own ancestors' lives that you could study more, some of the minutes or at least the context, the history. And I think that there's just a little bit more we can do with learning about church records. I know Sonny Morton and Harold Henderson have their book on researching church records, which I have read and I have here on my desk. And it's often a type of record type that maybe is not as easily available, and you have to dig a bit to figure out where those records would be, but well worth time and effort to dig into those. Well, we hope everyone listening has a great week, and good luck with all of your research, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our books, Research Like a Pro and Research Like a Pro with DNA on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our online courses or study groups of the same names. Learn more at familylocket.com/services. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our courses. To get updates in your email inbox each Monday, subscribe to our newsletter at familylocket.com/newsletter. Please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We read each review and are so thankful for them. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.